Hello, this is the Saroy channel and I'm so delighted you've joined me this evening. Oh, I do hope you're all doing marvellously well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and big hugs to everybody. I do hope you're doing well and I hope you've had a fantastic day and are about to enjoy your evening. And what better start than listening to a fantastic story. And this is a story about how Pokemon cards lead to a very unusual Bigfoot encounter. Who would have thought something like that could possibly happen? But the world is full of so many surprises, and this is one of them. But before we continue, don't forget to go and get yourself that lovely drink, and you don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 3 of our story tonight. The sequestered, somewhat forsaken, abandoned back road that I was frequenting on this early evening was not a road that was used much anymore, but in the 1800s it had been the main road in the area where people on foot could travel around for miles. One day bulldozers eventually came along to pave a brand new way, incorporating high-tech plans to ruthlessly make travel for drivers a whole lot easier and to build modern, easily accessible roads for the public to use, so that this back road had almost been forgotten. If I were to stumble upon anyone on this lonely, rather rugged road, it would likely be a horse rider or someone on an ATV. But certainly at this time of the evening, the road was as still as the first light of a new morning. For me it was a perfect, discreet way to get to my old house without being seen or detected by a passing car, or a nosy stranger wondering what on earth I was doing riding my bike so late on an evening. The night hung heavy with the nervous trepidation of what I was about to do. It was almost as if even the natural world herself was holding her breath on my account, and silently rooting for me that this night would malleably bend to my own persuasions, as I was sure it would. I kept assuring myself I had absolutely nothing to worry about. Getting into my old family home would be plain sailing, I was most sure. I'd be in the attic for mere minutes, find those beloved Pokemon cards tucked away in the London bus tin, buried beneath piles of my old toys. Once I'd retrieved the tin, I'd be gone, and I'd be out of the house faster than you could say greased lightning. Well, so I hoped. Once I reached the edge of the woods, where I'd left my bicycle behind a tree, and noted where I left it, so I wouldn't forget its location, I trotted down the tree-lined paths. I don't think I'd ever been into the woods at the dead of night like this before. I was struck by how cloyingly dark it was, and how inauspicious. I had arrived at last. I had reached my destination on the edge of the woods. I climbed off my bicycle, leaving it behind a distinctive tree, noting whereabouts I'd left it so I wouldn't forget its location. I sashayed eagerly down the tree-lined paths. I don't think I've ever been in the woods in the early evening like this before, but I was struck by how cloyingly dark and inauspicious it felt. Many deciduous trees had shed their leaves, so there were blessed moments for me when the moonlight danced merrily through the open spaces in the canopy, so that the woods became a lot less intimidating than they could have been. I knew the paths through the trees well, but at night everything was profoundly different, and this was a kind of difference that didn't sit very well with me, for I'd never enjoyed fumbling around in the dark at the best of times. But at least I was here and on my way. Thankfully I'd come well prepared with a head torch on my head, which lighted the path ahead of me. My boots gingerly crushed a debris of leaves and twigs beneath my feet, and I could hear the crickets and frogs singing their merry tunes, with a cheerful reassurance. But all of a sudden their melodies stopped, and I became uneasy, as everything was so quiet you could have practically heard a pin drop. Now I was hearing the thumping sound of my own heart, beating violently through my chest with a hefty vibration. I was certain that someone was there, cautiously hiding in the tenebrific shadows, clinging to them to remain discreet and hidden. Whoever they were watching me. A horrible, ill-omened chill ran down the back of my spine. I suddenly felt terribly afraid, almost as if my body was preparing me psychologically to face an uncertain danger that I couldn't physically see, but could tangibly perceive, like the invisible ink on a piece of paper with a warning message you know is there, even if you can't physically see it. I persuaded myself that I was just unduly nervous about slipping into our old house that no longer belonged to our family, which was why I was gripped with such a profound sense of disquiet. It's amazing how in human nature we will instinctively do anything to soothe the anxious thoughts that start to pound away at our subconscious, rather like someone knocking at our door at the dead of night, giving us one hell of a fright, for something in us tells us to calm down the inflammation of our discord so that we might be able to think straight and reason without flying into a panic. I then heard what I was sure were heavy feet, pounding the forest floor. There was no doubt in my mind. Something was there. The whole woodgrove began to vibrate and shake under the powerful booming thud of what appeared to be formidable feet. Something big, very intimidating, was standing in my midst. I could feel the energy of a daunting, mighty presence, even though I could not see anything. It's hard to explain this to you, but I knew that someone was definitely there. I began to sizably panic. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up to attention. Oh my God, someone was definitely there, and they were watching me. I was sure of it. My alarmed reaction should have encouraged me to run away as fast as I possibly could, but incongruously that is not what I did. My body rebelliously failed to cooperate, like an annoying car that stubbornly refuses to start, and you're going to need a pair of jump leads to get it going again. I froze for a moment, my whole body becoming like an ice statue at a state banquet. I could feel the domineering presence again, getting closer and closer to me. I became like a wild deer, sensing that a dangerous predator was in my midst, and not knowing what to do about it, and unable to react appropriately, almost as if I was a fly helplessly tangled up in the silken fibres of a web that held me firmly in place, so that moving away was the last thing I was capable of doing. It felt exactly like that. I heard the sound of the heavy feet again, and branches and foliage began to be pushed away, like a curtain. I looked in the direction of the sound, and was quite certain I'd seen an enormous, dark, humanoid shape, an obscure, indefinite silhouette, cloaked by the darkness. I also discerned some bright eye shine, looking directly at me. What the hell is that? I thought. I couldn't be seeing right. I blinked for a second, and that enigmatic, mysterious-looking figure had simply vanished. I told myself I'd imagined it all, as the thought of what I had seen was too difficult to take on board, given I had an important mission to undertake that could not be thwarted if I knew what was good for me. My pitiful finances would not have thanked me for abandoning this project that I had chosen to undertake, as those Pokemon cards were waiting for me. Perhaps the dark shadows in the woods were playing games with me, teasing me into believing that gruesome monsters were roaming these woods at night. Maybe there was a rational explanation for the eye shine I had seen. Perhaps the eye shine had come from an owl, perched on a branch somewhere, and in the tenebrific light it had successfully deceived me into believing it was an enormous entity of some kind. I wasn't easily scared, but something about the nauseatingly spooky atmosphere in the woods was making my skin prickle with a restless unease. I had been in the woods hundreds of times before as a kid, but they had never felt like this before. I had never been this flustered. I assured myself that I was experiencing the nervous jitters about breaking into my old home in the dead of night. As I knew what I was doing was intrinsically wrong, of course I did. It was against the law. But then again, those Pokemon cards were rightfully mine. I was relieved when I came upon the fence that divided our old house from the woods. I began to search for the huge hole in the fence, and thankfully it was still there. It hadn't been repaired. I managed to squeeze through it easily, and then there I was in the familiarity of the backyard. It was easy to see that the Longleys family wasn't in for the night, for the only lights on in the house were in the entrance hall and living room, while every other house light was off. I moved stealthily towards the back kitchen door, and then it occurred to me that the Longleys might have changed the locks. That thought had never crossed my mind for a second. It was likely that when you moved home, you might actually change your locks. It was with a large measure of nervous apprehension I anxiously slipped my key through the keyhole, and thankfully it turned. I felt an immeasurable sense of relief that I was now in the kitchen, with my headlight on. I didn't need to turn on any electric lights to draw any attention to me, but I knew no one was in. I noticed that by the kettle on the granite slab There was a host of flu medications, from cough syrups to warm hot toddies, to soothe a cold. I never gave those medications a moment of thought. I made my way discreetly through the house. It was better to err on the side of caution, I thought. I decided to be quiet, even though I was very confident that no one was home. I was grateful the Longleys didn't have an alarm system, or I really would have been in trouble, so I was grateful for small mercies. All of a sudden I heard a mumble of voices. I froze with horror, but then I realized that the voices came from a television set that was coming from the living room where the light was on. I relaxed at once. My father often left the television on, when our family went out for an evening, to make it appear that someone was there. It was quite a thrifty security measure that lightly others also adopted. I gingerly dashed up the staircase as noiselessly as possible. Moments later I was climbing up the ladder that led into the attic. I heard a dog in the house barking, but then all went still and quiet. There was a dog in the house, I thought. That really was a bummer, but at least no one was home, so it probably wasn't too much of a big deal. It was dark and unpleasant up in the attic. Dust clung to the air and stuck to the back of my throat, giving me an earnest desire to cough. Cobwebs bristled against my skin, and a distinctive scampering sound made me feel pretty certain there were rats running around the attic, and I hated rats, but I tried not to think about them. Before long my eyes became acclimatized to the dark shadows that danced around the eaves. I could see on one side of the attic were a collection of boxes filled with books, old toys, and general bric-a-brac. I didn't recognize any of those boxes as belonging to our family, so I assumed they belonged to the Longleys. For one horrifying moment I thought the 2 boxes our family had left in the attic had been cleared away, but then I saw the boxes hugging the rafters on the far side of the attic. One of the boxes said Christmas decorations, and the other had my name squiggled on the side of the cardboard in a thick green marker pen. Adam's Things, it said, in a squiggly, childish scrawl. Seeing that box really did feel like all my Christmases had come at once. I was overjoyed. I breathed a huge sigh of relief. Please God was the only prayer ringing in my head. May the Pokemon cards be inside the box. I pulled the box towards me, dragging it across the ground. It was pretty hefty. The box was covered in a thick layer of dust, which almost made me sneeze, for it was prickling my nostrils with an uncomfortable itch. All of a sudden I heard the dog barking downstairs, and then I heard a female voice. "What's up, Scampy? What are you getting so excited about?" I couldn't believe I'd heard a voice. I recognized it at once. It belonged to Wren Longleys. What the hell was she doing home? I stood still for a moment, holding my breath so tightly, so much so that I could barely breathe. My heart was beginning to catapult in my chest, for the last thing I needed was for Wren to discover I was stumbling around in her attic. If she was to come upstairs, she might notice the ladder hanging down from the attic, and that would certainly get her attention. Luckily, Wren's movements seemed confined to the downstairs area. Perhaps she was watching television in the living room. After all, I'd seen a light on in there, and had heard the television set was on. I heard Wren addressing the dog. "You silly mug, Scampy! No one is there. Everybody's out. Maybe you heard the rats in the attic. They keep scurrying around in there. I wish to God Mum would sort the problem out." When I heard Wren say the word attic, I nearly freaked out. Please God she wasn't going to come upstairs to investigate, was she? If she did, I was absolutely screwed. If she saw the ladder dangling down from the hole in the ceiling, she'd absolutely know there was an intruder in the house, and would likely call the police. I could potentially get into big trouble, as even though this was my old home, I was trespassing now on private property, which was in itself a crime. I tried not to think too much about how I was going to stealthily manage to leave the Longleys' house by way of the kitchen back door, undetected by a dog that was clearly very much well aware of my presence in the house. I knew any potential noise would likely get the dog's attention, for animals can easily pick up noises and smells that humans can't detect. Why wasn't Wren with her grandmother celebrating her grandmother's 80th birthday, I wondered? Why the hell was she home? Then I remembered the cold remedies I'd seen on the kitchen counter, and then I heard Wren cough. I realised she probably had not attended the birthday bash because she was sick. Just my luck that she was home tonight of all nights, when I thought I had the entire house to myself. I was just relieved she was spending her time in the living room, but God forbid if she came upstairs and saw me. I knew I needed to get out of the house as fast as I possibly could. I hurriedly sifted through many toys, board games and yearbooks from school, and then I found the red London bus tin that contained my precious Pokemon cards. I gingerly opened it, to find they were all thankfully there, and better still were in meticulous condition. I had hit pay dirt. At this point my fingers began to shake uncontrollably. So much so, I felt like a pirate who had stumbled across a lost treasure chest on a desert island. I was utterly delighted to have that tin in my hands finally. But I wasn't out of the woods yet. Wren was downstairs in the living room watching television with her dog at her side, and I needed to make my way cautiously through the kitchen and exit through the back door as quietly as I possibly could, and I couldn't afford to be seen or alert that dog to my presence. I discreetly climbed down the steps of the attic, but every creak seemed to explode in my ear. I managed to replace the adjoining ladder and slipped down the staircase. Moments later I was in the kitchen, and then Wren's dog began to bark. I left as quickly as I could by way of the back door, but then Wren shouted out, "Who the hell are you? What are you doing in my house?" I began to bolt across the backyard at lightning speed, without daring to look back even for a second. I scrambled behind the bush, squeezing through the hole in the fence. My legs leapt into action. I ran through the woods as fast as I could, clutching the tin tightly in my hands, refusing to let it go. When I looked behind me for a second, I realised to my horror that Wren Longleys was actually running after me. You've got to be kidding me. At this point my heart was thundering so loudly in my chest, I was surprised it didn't explode like a landmine. Had Wren recognised me, I wondered? Surely not. She'd barely been able to see me. It had been so dark in the kitchen. We had been to school together, for senior and junior high, but I hadn't seen her in a long time. Why was she running after me like this? If someone broke into your house, the last thing a woman should ever do is chase after an intruder. There's nothing more dangerous than a cornered animal that more often than not will definitely fight back. Then I remembered that at school Wren had always been different to the other pupils, always willing to take unnecessary risks when others would not. And to boot, she was pretty fast on her feet. As apart from being creative, she had always been an excellent runner. And now she'd chosen to give a perfect stranger chase. I mean, who does that? This was insane. "Stop!" Wren was crying out. "Stop!" Her crying made me run faster through the woods. My headlamp lit the path ahead of me, but Wren was running after me, without getting discouraged, even though she didn't have a torch to guide her through the trees, which was a dangerous thing for her to do, as angry, merciless burgeoning roots snaked their way down the woodland paths, like a labyrinth of distended varicose veins, that could quite literally trip you up if you weren't careful. But the last thing I needed to worry about was Wren Longleys. I needed to focus on getting back home safely, and making sure that Wren Longleys did not recognise me at all. Wren Longleys. I couldn't believe I'd ended up getting this god-awful cold, and inexplicable coughing fits that would practically make my body convulse, as sometimes the itch at the back of my throat was so bad that my coughing simply refused to abate. The timing of this horrible cold could not have been more inopportune, which meant that I couldn't join the family at the restaurant for my grandmother's 80th birthday party bash, which was being held at a very special venue, where a few of my grandmother's friends had been invited to the party to celebrate this once-in-a-lifetime occasion. How I wished with all my heart I could have been included in this cosy gathering, as my grandmother would not be around forever, and I thoroughly enjoyed spending quality time with her. There were going to be 40 people in attendance at that venue. I knew I was missing out big time, but it wouldn't be right for me to be unscrupulously passing my germs on to some of my grandmother's elderly friends, so it was the right thing for me to do to stay at home. My cough was dry, my throat was painfully scratchy and very parched. I felt almost as if 100 needles constantly pierced the back of my throat. My nose was running indiscriminately, and I had developed a banging headache that was drumming away at my forehead. The coughing fits weren't helping either. "You stay at home, Wren," my mother had said. "That cough of yours is pretty rough if you ask me. I'd never forgive myself if you passed on your germs to some of your grandmother's dear friends. Ella Boswell, for example, is 100 years old, still going strong. The last thing that woman needs is to be exposed to your infection. When you get to that fragile age, you have to watch your health even more fastidiously, as pneumonia can be quite common in the elderly, and it can be deadly, and we all know it can just start with an innocent cough." "Why did this have to happen to me, Mum?" I complained bitterly, feeling the frustration dragging down my upbeat mood. It really was a bummer to be sick like this. I really wanted to be at Grandma's party tonight, I said to her, making a disgruntled face. "I feel as if I've let her down badly. Do you think she's upset I'm not coming?" I asked my mother. "I mean, turning 80 is one hell of a special occasion, and I really wanted to be there for her." "I know, love," said my mother sympathetically, enveloping me in a warm hug. "It does suck, doesn't it?" "It's too bad," I said. "I know Granny says she understands that I can't join her for the party tonight, but I couldn't help thinking she was a little sad that I'm not coming. She said it didn't matter, but I think it does matter to her, Mum. Granny just doesn't want me to feel bad about it, but I can't help feeling I've really let her down badly." "Now you listen to me, Wren," said my mother, cupping my chin, lifting my head to meet her face, her eyes fixing on me. "Don't you dare feel bad about getting a cold. It's not your fault, and your grandmother understands that. I'm sure she's disappointed that her eldest granddaughter can't come to the party tonight, but it is what it is," said my mother. "Life happens, does it not, Wren? Your grandmother wouldn't want you to be passing on your germs to her friends, would she? And God forbid if they were to get sick as a result, she knows that that would be a very bad thing. We can't afford to take precarious, foolish risks like this. And with those coughing fits of yours that you've been having, it's pretty easy for germs to spread like wildfire. I tell you what I will do, Wren. I'll bring you home some of your grandmother's birthday cake tonight. I ordered ice cream cake from that gorgeous ice cream shop in town. They make the best ice cream cakes you've ever seen. You'll probably find ice cream is very soothing on that scratchy throat of yours, now I come to think of it." "Thanks, Mum, I'd appreciate that. I haven't got much of an appetite at the moment, but ice cream would definitely soothe a dry throat." My mother chuckled. "I'll see to it we bring you some. But knowing your grandmother as I do only too well, she'll probably make up a plate of goodies to bring back to you. She's very thoughtful like that. But are you going to be all right at home all on your own, Wren?" "It's going to be lonely on my own in the house without you all. Even lonelier thinking of you all having so much fun without me. But I guess I'll sit in the sitting room with Scampy for company and watch another episode of Fear Factor. Why am I always the one in this family, Mum, that gets colds like this? It's not fair. Do you think I've got a bad immune system or something?" "Well, I think the reason you get colds more than the rest of us in this family is self-explanatory, really, isn't it?" said my mother, who was so sharp she never missed a beat. "You do?" I asked, looking a little flawed. "But of course, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Think about it. You're a hairdresser by profession, exposed to a large customer base. And when you work around a lot of people that come and go, it's easy to pick up on germs, especially around the change of season like this, when everyone is getting colds." "I suppose you're right," I grumbled. "I hadn't thought of it like that." "Oh, there you are," said my grandmother, entering the living room a short while later. She was elegantly dressed to the nines. "How do I look, Wren?" she asked me, doing a proud twirl, so that her beautiful dress floated around her in luxuriant layers of silk. "Does my dress meet with your approval? I bought it from the boutique in town. I love the emerald green colour. It's so vibrant, don't you think?" "Oh, Granny, you look absolutely gorgeous. I've never seen a more beautiful dress. It must have cost you an absolute fortune." "Well, it didn't come cheap," my grandmother said, flushing with the pleasure of my sincere compliment. "But then again, you don't turn 80 every single day." By wearing something extra zooty, don't you think? I do agree with you on that, Granny, and it was worth the money. You had to buy something special for tonight's celebration. You look stunning, I told her. It was true, the green dress brought out my grandmother's pale blue eyes, and her short curly grey hair looked particularly fetching that evening. My friend Mona from the hair salon where I worked had fixed my grandmother's hair and nails and makeup, doing an excellent job by the looks of things. I would have happily done my grandmother up myself, but sadly in my current rather beleaguered condition I couldn't afford to inflict my savage cold on my grandmother. By all accounts she looked remarkably good for a woman of her age, and no one would ever believe she was now 80. You really do look beautiful, Granny, I repeated again, and I mean that.
Thank you, dear, said my grandmother, looking pleased, but the sad look in her eyes remained. It's such a dreadful pity, Wren, that you're not going to be joining me for the party tonight. You've always been my favourite grandchild, so not having you around is disappointing. I would give you a hug, but I don't want to get that cold bug of yours. It sounds awfully nasty. And those coughing fits of yours, well, I haven't heard anything like them before. You should take some cough medicine, love, and if it doesn't get any better by the morning, maybe a visit to the doctor is in order.
You keep away from me, Granny. I want you around for a very long time, so the last thing we need is your getting sick. And as for my cough, believe me, I've tried the cough medicine, but it doesn't appear to be working very well.
If that's the case, dear, you should try making some lemon and honey for yourself, said my grandmother, looking concerned. I find honey is very soothing on a dry throat. I highly recommend it.
I might just do that, I said.
What can I say, dear? I'm going to miss you tonight very much, said my grandmother. At least you've got Scampy for company.
My grandmother bent down to stroke my golden retriever, Scampy. Scampy let out a happy woof and thumped his tail excitedly. He really adored my grandmother.
You be a good boy, Scampy, she told my dog. Make sure you look after Wren tonight.
My golden retriever's dark, soulful eyes studied my grandmother, as if to say,
But I always look after Wren. What do you think I've been doing all my life?
My beautiful dog Scampy, who was a mass of golden blonde hair, was habitually almost joined to me at the hip. My customers at the hair salon where I worked all loved him to bits, and some of them would tease me relentlessly that the only reason they kept coming back to me was to see Scampy, of course. I'd never take offence, because everybody just loved my dog. The house became very quiet when I heard the cheerful voices marching towards my father's large SUV. Everyone was so beautifully attired, including my two younger siblings, who were dressed in cute little outfits my mother had bought for them. I, on the other hand, looked like a sorrowful, bedraggled mess, with a red nose that was wearing a pair of bleak, very old sweatpants and a loose-fitting sweatshirt with a pair of sneakers. I watched my little sister and brother climbing into the back of my father's big, chunky SUV, while my grandmother climbed into the front seat to sit next to my father. Car doors slammed, wheels rolled down the drive, and then the house was steeped in an uncongenial silence which made me feel horribly alone. I returned to the living room feeling a little sorry for myself, and settled on the couch, covering myself with a crochet blanket, along with a box of tissues that sat comfortably on my lap, while Scampy lay at my feet. Using the remote control, I began to channel hop, and before long I was happily watching Fear Factor, horrified to see a woman being covered in tarantulas. I've never been comfortable with spiders at the very best of times, so the rather horrifying scene made me shudder in abject disgust. I may have been adventurous by nature, but being covered with spiders was going a step too far even for me. I'd always had an aversion to spiders, and seeing them crawling all over this poor woman was, in my humble opinion, almost a fate worse than death, although not quite. All of a sudden Scampy sat up with a start, his ears standing erect, and his sensitive nose facing towards the living-room door. He began to let out a low growl, as if sensing someone was there. I didn't take much notice, as the tickle at the back of my throat became so intense I had another coughing fit that lasted a couple of minutes, where I was grabbing my chest as I leaned forward and practically gagged. Finally the coughing subsided, and I blew my nose with the tissue very hard. I continued to watch television, glad that the scene with the spiders had long since passed. I noticed Scampy's attention remained completely devoted to the door, almost as if he'd heard something I had not. I wondered if it was the damned rats in the attic playing around again. There were probably a few of them up there, running riot among the cobwebs and dust. Sometimes in bed at night I heard them scurrying around, and they often kept me awake. Scampy began to bark. "What is it, Scampy?" I asked my dog. He continued to look at me through dark eyes, as if to say, "Surely you heard that noise." I hadn't heard anything, of course. But then again, this old Victorian property was noisy. The plumbing was old, and the pipes would occasionally rattle. My mother loved historic homes like this with a passion, and believed that noises came with old houses, and it was a small price to pay to live in a house like this, steeped in a rich, vibrant history. She'd been right about that. This gorgeous house was so much better than the modern monstrosity I'd grown up in as a girl, which was about as characterless as a public toilet facility on a university campus. Yet there were people who thought the last house we'd lived in was nifty and state-of-the-art, but glass and steel just doesn't rock my world. I cautiously opened the living room door, while Scampy hurried to the bottom of the staircase, and began to bark, looking up at the stairs as if someone was standing there. I knew, of course, he must be hearing the rats running around in the attic, so I tried to calm Scampy down. We both returned to the living room, and I sat back on the sofa, covering myself with a crochet blanket again. I was thinking about going back into the kitchen to make some honey and lemon for my throat, but then again I felt too lazy to be bothered about such physical exertions. I'd sooner drift off to sleep on the couch, watching television, while I waited for my family to return from my grandmother's birthday bash. I could feel my eyelids gradually growing heavier and heavier, as the television prattled in the background. All of a sudden I sat up with a start, as if I'd been jolted directly out of my sleep. Scampy emitted a low growl, and then barked, rushing over to the living room door and scratching it furiously with his paws, as if he wanted to break out of the living room. In that moment I heard a thud. What the hell, I thought. Was someone in the house? Surely not. I cautiously left the living room and hurried over to the kitchen, abandoning my crochet blanket that I had been hugging on the couch. Everything in the kitchen was dark, but I didn't even bother to put the light on, lest it should hurt my eyes, as our kitchen lights were unforgivingly bright. I let out a horrible gasp as I saw a shadowy figure leaving by way of the back kitchen door. You've got to be kidding me. Was this actually happening? It couldn't be. I quickly held on to Scampy's collar for dear life. I knew he was eager to chase after the intruder, and I couldn't allow that to happen. No, Scampy, stay where you are. Scampy obeyed my request. I dashed out of the kitchen after the stranger, leaving Scampy inside. I was sure I'd locked the kitchen earlier on in the evening, but then again, with my cold virus and my foggy brain, I could have overlooked it. Before I knew it, my instincts took over. So there we are, that is the end of part 3. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.